This morning on Nova Legends podcast, I want to do our midseason Northern Virginia football update. Again, back with me is Jason Sterling. Jason's been doing this with me for the last year or so, and with me for the first time is Brian Westhoff. Um, Brian is an '89 graduate of Potomac High School in Woodbridge, Dale City, I guess. A
Dumfries,
tennis player
Dumfries.
there, UVA '94. But he had football players in Prince William County. His son, most recently, his son was a quarterback at Colgan, and also he played at Christopher Newport. You may remember Jason helps with the Stonebridge commentary, the play-by-play. Also, he's a '94 graduate of James Madison. Went to Goochland High School, played football, wide receiver there. Goochland is about 30 miles west of Richmond. Guys, did I get that right? Was that right?
Yep.
All right, cool. Well, let's just jump on into it. First of all, what do you guys think about the early season so far? I think my early takeaways is Stafford County is stacked. If you look at some of the key losses for many of the teams, it points to Stafford County. It's amazing how strong they are down there. And also, I think that my biggest surprise so far this year is Washington Liberty. Washington Liberty coming out of the Liberty District. They are 6-0, the first time in 50 years, I believe, for that school. Some really huge. They destroyed a pretty solid Yorktown team, so they're definitely a early season surprise. But those are my early season takeaways. Jason, what about you? What are your early season thoughts on the season, on the overall football season?
Yeah, Julian, look, I'm glad you picked up on Washington Liberty. I was hoping we'd be able to talk a little bit about them today. Very impressed with what they're doing there. That team, I don't know if you had a chance to see them play or seen any of their plays on film. They spread you out. They have a phenomenal quarterback, kid by the name of Matthew Aberson, and they just throw the ball up and down the field. They sort of call it, I think, basketball on turf here. And they're fun to watch. They're actually 7-0 because they picked up a win last week, so they're undefeated. They had a really good year last year. Didn't quite make it all the way through to the state tournament, obviously, and I guess brought a lot of kids back. So very, very impressed with what Washington Liberty is doing, and I'm real curious to see if they can challenge the likes of a Madison or a Westfield in that region. I think they're definitely the best team in the Liberty District by far. And be real curious to see. And then I think your other point there on the teams in Stafford County. Somehow Stafford County got loaded this year. I don't know what happened over the summer. If a lot of talented kids came up, but you look at Stafford, North Stafford, Brook Point, some of those teams that are down in that area, just really, really good. And I'll be curious to see if one of those teams can make it pretty far, maybe to a state semifinal or a state final.
Yeah, and they're in the 6B. The
6B.
Stafford, or are they 6A? They're the Stafford
6B.
6B.
Yeah, Julian, it's funny because for years I've been doing all the PowerPoints and one of the math nerds that are able to crack that code. But if you look at 6B, it's 19 teams, by far the largest region in the state, and it spreads across 3 districts. You got the Commonwealth with all the Stafford schools, the Cedar Run and the Cardinal. Right now, the latest ratings have 3 of the top 4 teams in 6B coming out of Stafford, out of the Commonwealth District. It's Stafford, North Stafford, and Colonial Forge. And for years, it was always Cedar Run, Cardinal, and Colonial Forge. And all of a sudden, you got Stafford and North Stafford, the top 2 teams in the region. It's amazing.
Yeah,
Stafford can score. Stafford
Yeah.
can score some points, Julian. They're hanging a lot of points on people. And they're hanging a lot of points on some pretty good teams. And that's a program, Brian. You'll know they've been down for a few years. I think they had a good run, maybe in the like the 2016 to 2019 range. Had some good teams, and then they sort of really fell off for a little bit. But they have brought it back with a vengeance. So really glad to see they're doing well down there.
when you think about the Stafford demographic, is it more like Prince William County, Fairfax, or Loudoun? It's probably very similar to the demographic of Prince William County.
Yeah, pretty similar. I mean, you got right past Quantico down there, the same type of, you call it Northern Virginia, I guess. I mean, I grew up down here, so it's, yeah, very similar to Prince William County.
Yeah. Well, look, guys, let's jump on into the districts now. Let's start with the 6C, and let's go with Liberty right away. And Jason mentioned how strong Washington and Liberty is. I think the Liberty is one of the most fun districts to watch because unlike most districts in high school football and even basketball, they tend to be top heavy and dominated. But in the Liberty, Washington Lee has been dominant, but Yorktown has been solid. Marshall's been very good. Only 2 losses for that program. Langley opened up the season, I believe, 4-0 with a brand new coach. They had some drama in the offseason. And Herndon has had some big wins. So that is those are 5 solid teams in one district. We don't get that in every season. Jason, Brian, you have any thoughts on the Liberty district? I know you're a Prince William guy. Have you peeked at all at that district?
Yeah, I mean, it is pretty awesome to see teams like Herndon. I mean, you rewind, what was it, Jason, 3 or 4 years ago, they had like almost a 20-game losing streak or something, and it was the assistant from Catholic came over and really turned that program around. They've been really up and coming in the last few years. But yeah, you look at Liberty, you look at Washington Liberty, you look at Marshall. Marshall's having a great season. They've had a couple good years, in the past. I mean, traditionally, it's been Centerville, Madison, obviously, Westfield, those type of teams dominating that region. You're seeing a lot of Liberty teams coming up.
Yeah, maybe this is the year the Liberty teams can give some competition, as Jason said, to Madison. But what about you, Jason? What are your thoughts on the Liberty? I know Washington Liberty, who you mentioned, Elijah Hughes' little brother's on that team, and I understand he's a pretty good player.
Yeah, I think to Brian's point, I think we've historically over the last 7 to 10 years dismissed the Liberty District when it comes to Region 6D, just assuming that someone out of the Concord District would come out and win that region. We're going to have to see this thing out this time. I really think so. With Washington Liberty, you guys mentioned George Marshall. They're a very run-heavy team. Marshall, very different from Washington Liberty. Liberty throws the ball a lot. George Marshall likes to run the ball. Very strict, strong defense on George Marshall. They've got a kid on the defensive line. I wrote down his name, Oliver Smith, I think. He's got 12 sacks on the year. Wow. Through 7 games. So, they've got some really good teams down there, and Langley's having a pretty good year. So I think the curiosity for me, can they sustain that success throughout the course of the full 10-game regular season and then really try and make some noise in the playoffs? So we know what Madison's going to bring playoff time. It looks like Westfield's on the rebound here. We probably talk about them in a little bit. So I'll be real curious to see if they can sustain this type of success. Washington Liberty, they've had one close game, and that was a 10-point game to Herndon. They have boat raced everyone else. Now, they do get into some shootouts, right? Their defense has given up 123 points in the last 3 games. But those track meets they like. They want to see that game, I think, 50-30. And so far, they've been very successful at it. Yeah.
I do want to mention Yorktown's running back, Kobe Casalingo, has been hurt, and his first game back was last week. I think he got 100 yards. So that Yorktown may be on the upswing with Kobe back. Well, let's go to the Concord. Real statement win by Madison over Westfield. I watched the second half of that game online. Westfield outgained Madison. Madison's been probably one of the hottest teams in the state all year. Westfield outgained them, but they had 3 turnovers. I think that the turning point in the game was probably when they had the ball on the 1-yard line, at the 3-yard line, I think, with first and goal, and they're unable to score in the third quarter. That may have changed things. But anyway, they still had a lead late in the game, and they were unable to convert. Madison showed a lot of grit in winning that game. I really was impressed by Westfield's tailback, number 2. I tried to get his name offline. I couldn't. But that looks like those 2 teams look like class. With Westfield only losing, I believe, this year to Patriot. So, Jason, do you want to start with the Concord?
Yeah. We've seen Westfield over the last, 5 or 6 years come off a little bit. I think they really are back. To take Madison that far and have a close game that could have gone either way, I think says something about, I think they've returned the corner here. But it also tells me how good James Madison is to be able to pull out a win like that. We've seen so many games. How many games have we seen in the last 3 or 4 years where Madison has pulled out a game when, it could have gone either way? They have phenomenal coaching. Justin Counts, what he's done in Madison. I mean, we've talked about him, Julian, probably each show you've had me on. And I'm just, every time I see him, I'm more and more impressed with what he does. And they've, I sort of call them a professional amateur team, because they're a group of amateurs, but they play like professionals. They don't make a lot of mistakes. They don't shoot themselves in the foot. They're very well coached. They're well rounded. If you don't bring your top game to play James Madison, you're going to be in trouble. You've got to be clicking on every cylinder. And I do think they still are the favorite, but I think Westville got a lot of confidence out of that loss to them last Friday, and I think that could help them if they meet again, and they likely will potentially in the playoffs at some point.
Yeah. I think you brought up a good point. Madison probably executes as good as anybody in the clutch the last few years. I've seen them convert big third downs, fourth downs, and they'll bring a kickoff return in a key situation and win a game. They always kind of find a way to get a win. So a close game, Madison probably their chances are upgraded. And again, Westfield was very, very impressive. I do want to give a shout out to Oakton. Oakton has had a solid opening year. I believe they're 3-3 or maybe 3-4, 4-3. But they're also the third team. South Lakes maybe a bit down this year. And so what about you, Brian? Do you have any thoughts on the Concord district?
Just to tag on to what Jason was saying about Madison, I see them very similar to Battlefield, where just super well coached, not going to make mistakes, and they have that youth program that just is very kind of aligned with the high school with Vienna Youth there up there. So, we'll see if Washington Liberty or any of the other teams can kind of take them down coming up here in the playoffs, but it's looking like another Madison run for sure.
Yeah, that's a good point about those Gainesville football programs and Prince William County General. They are very similar to what Madison does, not just in football, but they do it in
Sure.
baseball, they do it in softball. They really
Lots of community involvement.
it is. They really make it easy for the coach. Not easy, but they really set the table for the coaching staff in the high school level. Well, let's go to national in the 6C, right? Because Liberty and Concord is 6D.
6C.
Right.
Yeah. So national is 6C. It's a one pony race. Hayfield, it's so hard to judge Hayfield because they really have not played a tough schedule because it turns out South County is down this year. So Hayfield is amazing, but they really have not probably played a tough team. They're going to play Riverdale Baptist coming up, who's coming off a win in Texas, I believe, last week. So that's going to be a great game to watch, and we'll know where Hayfield is. But anyway, it's a one-trick pony. I'll let you start off with Hayfield, Brian, since your son took some bad beats to Coach Overton in his career, and you had to sit there and watch that. What are your mid-season thoughts about Hayfield's progress?
Yeah, I mean, Coach Overton's getting them rolling now, and they just got Juju Preston back.
Oh, they did.
He was eligible this past week, so Clemson commit there. He had a big game. I mean, Hayfield obviously is coasting. Really, the key is kind of, can they continue this once they start hitting region play and going up against Madison? Which, I mean, they're going to be Hayfield, right? They're going to. It's really kind of who else is going to be in the playoff picture. The national district, I mean, traditionally that's been a pretty rough district. I kind of almost see it right now, similar to 6B in terms of most of the teams are going to be from the Patriot. Looks like that feels. I'm looking at the PowerPoints right now. I mean, Hayfield's already separated themselves from a PowerPoint perspective over Lake Braddock. So,
yeah, it's Hayfield's having a hard time getting PowerPoints because their strength of schedule is so low. But I understand.
And they don't care. I mean, they don't care if they travel, if they play at home. And I think it's kind of a narrative that people talk about as hosting the the state semi playoff game. But if they have to go across the county to Madison, whatever.
Yeah, I think it means a little less than the 6C and 6D. Yeah. Last year, it came back to bite South Lakes, I believe, in the seedings. But generally, it means a little bit less than it would mean in the 6B. On the 6A, the PowerPoints, I believe. Anyway, Jason, do you want to chime in on Hayfield? I guess it's a lot.
Yeah, I think the thing that just impresses me the most, they've been able to park a lot of this off-season noise to the side and go out on Friday nights and execute. They're scoring 62, 63 points a game. I know their schedule hasn't been tough. Julian, you alluded to that, but Coach Overton's right back what he was doing, with his former team. So they are what they are. They're really good. I think it's a cakewalk for them, honestly. I do. I think they're that far ahead of everybody else in the national anyway. That I don't see them. I mean, if you're West Springfield and Edison, you're probably feeling pretty good because you both scored a touchdown against them. So I guess you can go hang your hat on that. But yeah, look, we know the roster's loaded. We know Coach Overton and his pedigree of coaching and just having really good football teams. And they've, for 2.5 hours every Friday night, they go out and they prove themselves. Probably a little less because they've had a lot of running clocks. Maybe it's only 2 hours in game time for those guys. But I continue to be impressed that they've been able to isolate and park all the stuff, and we all know what that was, just the noise that was around that program, good, bad, or indifferent, and go out and put together 7 super impressive wins. Again, the competition not super great, but you still got to be able to go do it and not let that stuff affect you. And a number of those players were sidelined for a few games, and to Brian's point, their top receiver just got back here. So
yeah. What's going to be exciting next year when they can put together more of a national type schedule, at least a regional type schedule. Hayfield's closer to the city than Prince William, so they should be able to get some, some of the DC powerhouses on the schedule, and they're going to need to because Coach Overton's going to attract great players, and I think the great players are going to want to play against top competition. So I'm sure it's probably a little. Coach Overton's a great motivator, but it's pretty tough when you're going to go out there and you're going to play justice, and you're going to win 80-0. So anyway, you can't really help that. It's his first year there. Let's go to the Patriot district. I think it's a little bit down this year. I think you could say, but great coaches, great programs in that conference. Also for basketball as well. Lake Braddock seems to be, clearly in charge of that district. But Fairfax, they have wins over South County. I think they have a big one over Centerville, I believe. But anyway, it looks like those two teams are by far the top 2 teams. You want to start with the Patriot, Jason?
Yeah, I do think Lake Braddock's the premier team there. Fairfax, though, is sitting at 5-2, I believe, right now. So I never write Fairfax off. They've had some really good teams over the last couple of years. I think Lake Braddock, what I'm looking for here in these last few games and some of their early playoff games, can their defense improve a little bit? They've given up quite a few points. I think offensively, Lake Braddock can really put some points on the board. Can they defensively step up enough to make a deep run into the playoffs? Because obviously, to be able to, at some point, one of these teams likely will have to face Hayfield, and that's, for a regional crown, that's going to be a very, very tough out, as you can imagine. So they've got some really good players like Braddock, Kai Austin, one of their wide receivers. I think he's averaging about 100 yards a game receiving. Great linebacking core, but they've got to be able to stop teams from getting in the end zone. So that's what I'm looking for out of Lake Braddock these last couple games. And we'll continue to see if a team like Fairfax, West Springfield, can step up a little bit. South County, as you mentioned, they're down this year. There's sort of a shock for us, I think, to see South County with only a couple of wins on the board right now. But I do think overall that district is off a little bit this year. I suspect, graduation hit a lot of these teams pretty hard. So we'll see if they can rebuild.
Yeah. Thanks, Jason. Brian, what do you think about the Patriot? Do you have any thoughts on a very prestigious, competitive district, but just maybe not quite what it usually is this year?
Yeah, I agree with Jason. I mean, it's definitely been down. I mean, you look at South County, Jordan Dennis. He's what, a 3-year starter, I think, at quarterback, graduated. So they're definitely kind of reloading and trying to rebuild. I'm looking at the PowerPoint standings and figuring out who's going to be number 8. You got Alexandria City right now as number 8, and they will be the lucky one to draw Hayfield first round. So that'll be interesting. But yeah, I think, like Jason said, I think it's down a little bit, but we'll see.
Yeah. Alexandria City's had a really solid season. I think they've proven themselves this year. I went to Robinson. We had a really tough year last year, and we're a football. I wouldn't say powerhouse, but we're a decent program in football. This year, the results have been a little bit better. We just got to stop playing the Prince William County teams, and I think things will be a little easier for us. But speaking of Prince William County, let's go to one of the best districts in the state right now. What is that? The Cedar Run. There was a huge game last week. Gainesville, kind of the new kid on the block, the newest of the new schools, went out to Patriot. Patriots never been able to get over the battlefield hump, it seems like. But Patriot kind of took control out of that district for at least the early skirmishes. So and also I would like to say I coached the Osborne basketball coach Jeremy Marshall for many years, and he told me if I didn't mention the Osborne team, he was going to punch me in the face. So I want to make sure I mention the Osborne is 5-1. I didn't want to stop. I didn't leave the Cedar Run without mentioning that. So anyway, Brian, I'll let you start with the Cedar Run first. What are your early season thoughts on, or
Yeah, I
mid-season
mean
thoughts
the
on?
Cedar Run, yeah, ever since Gainesville has been built, you got the big three. You got Patriot, Battlefield, and Gainesville. Big game with Gainesville and Patriot last week. Gainesville was taken up. I mean, it was a close game, and then Jackson McCarter took over in the second half, had a couple big runs. So I think it's those three are going to be kind of at the end of the season, the three top teams left standing. There's a big game with Gainesville and Battlefield coming up this week. That's going to be a rivalry. And most of those kids grew up playing against each other or with each other, in youth football. You mentioned Osborne, 5-1, really have had an impressive season. They hit the gauntlet of their schedule though coming up. I mean, they're going to be playing the big three and then Osborne Park. So they're definitely going to have to win against Osborne Park, and maybe they squeak out a win against those three. But at the end of the season, if they're left with a 6-4 record, I think they're in the hunt for a number 8 seed. But yeah, the Cedar Run, it's going to be the big three for sure.
Thanks, Brian. Jason, do you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely agree with what Brian said there. I do think Battlefield still is a notch above the other big two. To me, they've proven that over the last couple of years. I tell you that the thing and I think it's this Friday, Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Battlefield and Gainesville play coming up here. So, you mentioned a big game last week, and we got another big one this Friday. So I'll be curious to see if Gainesville can make some noise in that game. Battlefield's a loaded team. They're really good. We obviously need them. I know they're looking for that next step late in the playoffs into a state title. That's a hard mountain to climb. I mean, we've seen it with a lot of teams. And, the Class 6 is extremely, and Class 5, they're extremely top heavy with a couple excellent teams. So we'll see if Battlefield can do that. But you're right. I mean, Osborne's right there at 5-1. Now, again, can they hang on to that? I'm not quite sold on them yet because of that schedule thus far. So I'm not ready to put them into the big three yet with Gainesville and Battlefield and Patriot. But it'll be interesting. The Cedar Run is a very, very, very strong district of football. I mean, it may be one of the strongest single districts in Class 4, 5, or 6 combined, to be honest with you. Maybe they don't have the super elite team, but they've got some really, really, really good teams.
Yeah. What do you guys think about the knock against Battlefield and that they don't schedule really tough non-district games? Now, the district is tough enough generally, so you're going to get 3 or 4 good games in your district. But do you think Battlefield should try harder to schedule some really tough top non-district games to get them ready for the Mauries or whoever, not Maury, I guess, but Oscar Smith or whoever they could face in the postseason?
Yeah, I mean, it's something they probably got to take a look at here in the coming years. I guess they're on the 2-year cycle now to map that out. But those out-of-district games, they have, 3 available games. And I think traditionally they've been playing Prince William County teams from the Cardinal as their. But yeah, if they're competing against the state level, the last thing you want to do is see top-notch talent here at playoff time for the first time. I believe, Jason, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think they scheduled some tough scrimmages this year, so maybe they're starting to push that way.
Yeah, they did, and I do think it's something they're all 3 of those big teams, but specifically Battlefield. I think they're looking at that, Julian, to see what they can do over the next 3 to 4 years to get some harder teams. The issue, I think it's going to be hard to get out of state teams because they're sort of right in the middle of the state. That traffic on 95 is brutal. And honestly, a lot of athletic directors don't want to let, from everywhere, don't want to let the kids out of school at 2:00 to go sit on 95. It's tough. It's a real thing. So, they're going to have to look around maybe Northern Virginia, possibly, someone from the Richmond area, maybe a Highland Springs type team, those types of teams that, hopefully they can get on the schedule. And I think it would help those teams too. I'm a fan of playing difficult games early in your out of district, early part of your schedule. I think that's proven time and time and again to be very effective, right? I don't think you get a true measurement of your team when you play some of the weaker teams that are out there. And sometimes you can't help it. The schedule's set and athletic directors have to work together and, 2 of them have to agree on a game, or back to back over 2 years. So I think if Battlefield can focus on that, over the next few years, it'll only help that program elevate to the elite level.
I mean, you look at Madison. Madison's taken a page out of that playbook and scheduled Stonebridge all the time. They definitely do a tough out of conference schedule. So
yep.
Yeah, see, Brian, you can tell Jason's from Stonebridge. He believes in that tough non-district
yeah.
schedule. I mean, poor Stonebridge. They killed themselves in a non. in the early season play. So let's go to the Cardinal, which it's kind of like when you watch National Geographic or something when the big grill is gone, and then there's a big scramble for everyone to take control of the pride or whatever you call it.
Yeah.
They alpha they become the next alpha. It's been a fascinating district this year. Woodbridge really only has one bad loss. That's to Gainesville. They've had some pretty good results, including against Stafford County teams. Forest Park and Garfield have had some decent wins as well. What do you guys think? Jason, you want to get started on this? What do you guys think about the Cardinal?
Yeah, I think it's. I don't know who's going to come out of the Cardinal right now. I really don't. If I had to take a guess, it'd probably be Garfield or Forest Park. I think it's a lot of pretty good teams, but I don't think you have anybody that's really going to run away with this. So, obviously Freedom Woodbridge, we know that story. They've got a modified schedule, so that they're sort of parked to the side. Uh, there's some good talent and some good teams. I just don't see an elite team in that district. And I think they're going to have Brian mentioned earlier, this region, multiple districts, 3 districts, I think make up this region, 19 teams. You can't just, come in at 4 and 6 and back yourself into the playoffs. You're probably going to be left out, So this is a district where you have to find your way to a minimum of 5, probably 6, possibly 7 wins in order to get to the playoffs. So I think that's sort of what's going to, I think, keep the Cardinal district at bay a little bit. It's just that they're probably going to beat up on each other, and you're going to have a lot of teams with 4 wins, 5 wins. You'll get a team or two maybe in there, but it won't be a lot.
Can you imagine how happy Freedom South Riding is to get out of that tough meat grinder and poor Independence? Very nice school, well organized school, great demographics for many things, but they're going to have a rude awakening when they come down and play in the 6B next season.
Yeah.
And also Brian, I forgot to mention Colgan. Colgan has had some decent results. I think all of us sometimes feel that Colgan should be at least one day amongst the better teams in Prince William County, according to what the demographic and the school is. It's huge. It's well regarded in many ways. Great administration. Anyway, what are your thoughts about the Cardinal?
Yeah, the Cardinals actually, you actually have a fair amount of new coaching in the county or in that side of the county in the Eastern County this year. With Freedom leaving, it kind of opens the doors for Garfield, Woodbridge, Forest Park, and maybe Colgan makes a breakthrough. But it's really going to be those 4 teams probably battling for one playoff spot. I kind of hear the narrative that the Cardinals going to be shut out of playoff spots. I don't see it. I mean, they're starting to enter conference play, and just the way the numbers are going to work. But really, like Jason said, it's going to be, you're definitely going to have to get to 6 wins, probably 7. Depending on how those power points and rider points play out. And they each play each other coming up here. So Woodbridge is going to have some big games, against Garfield and Forest Park and so forth. So it'll be interesting to see. I think. Definitely contrasting styles. I mean, you look at Forest Park; they got their 2D1, linemen and their battering ram and Landon Hunt as a running back. Totally different styles than the other teams, but it'll be interesting to see for sure.
Who's your pick? Which of those teams do you feel is the strongest in the Cedar Run?
I think Garfield's going to kind of come through. They have a new head coach, a new defensive coordinator. I think there's a little chip on their shoulder now with Freedom kind of leaving. There's an edge. We'll see if they can make a run. I think back to your Colgan conversation. I think the key to Colgan is believing that they can actually beat teams like that, right? They're kind of right there. They're going to have a breakthrough, and have one of those big wins to get on a roll. But I think the Woodbridge Garfield game is going to be a tough game as well. Woodbridge definitely has a lot of talent for sure. Their quarterback's amazing. I think he's a sophomore. So.
Oh well, that's an old school matchup. We're getting.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So we basically started off with the Stafford team, Stafford, Mountain View, Brook Point. I think Massaponax is in Spotsylvania County, right? Is that right, Massaponax?
Yeah, they're Class 5.
Yeah, they're Class 5.
Oh, they're Class 5. Got it. So we start over there. Let's go to Loudoun County. Jason's home, and let's start with the Class 5, which is it's a fascinating conference. Stonebridge has 4 brutal losses and 1 tough loss to the Woodgrove. That was maybe a surprise, but they got back on the right track with the win against Potomac Falls, back in the cozy confines of the Potomac District. Don't know what that means yet, but I would believe that Stonebridge is going to be tough here on out. I was at the Briarwoods game against Riverside. Impressed by their passing game. They got a great wide receiver, number 2. I can't think of his name. But I was definitely impressed. I'm sure Jason probably knows this kid, but they've lost to John Champ and North Stafford, 2 solid losses. Huge win over Loudoun County, 42-7. I've seen Loudoun County play. Loudoun County is no slouch. So Briarwoods looks like they could be tough. Independence, 3 incredible losses, really incredible in terms of the tough teams. Brook Point, Stafford, and Massaponax. Only they gave Tuskegee their only loss. Plus, they beaten a tough Woodgrove team and Light Ridge, who's had decent results. And then Riverside has played well at times this year. And I mentioned Light Ridge. Anyway, that's my 30,000 feet in the sky view, Jason. What do you think? Let's start off with Stonebridge. Are they back on the right track now?
I think I don't know if they're back on the right track, Julian. That's probably, in my opinion, a little bit of an overstatement. I think they're trending in the right direction. I still am struggling with them trying to make a deep run in the playoffs because of their offense. Defensively, I think they're one of the better teams in Class 5. But a defense can only get you so far. You've got to be able to put some points on the board, and they really that Pot Falls game was only 7-0 at halftime. So,
is that right? Wow.
Yeah, so they did explode in the second half, put some points on the board, which is the first time we've seen that all year. Now, granted, look, their schedule was brutal, as you talked about. Quince Orchard, Dunbar, who has almost a 40-game winning streak in Maryland, Good Counsel, who's a nationally ranked team. So I think the class of the region is Briarwoods, to be honest with you. And I think they've had a couple tough losses. I mean, losing to North Stafford this year that's not a bad loss, to be honest with you. I think what North Stafford's done to rebuild that team is pretty phenomenal. And of course, the 1-point loss in the game first week of the season, the champ that you mentioned. I still think the experience of Briarwoods right now, offensively, is going to lead. I think you may be talking about Colin Capistrant, the receiver for
Yes. He's
for
tough.
Briarwoods. He's really good. Big kid, goes both ways. Similar to Brady Carmichael, their quarterback. I mean, that kid as a quarterback, he will virtually, if it's a tight game, he'll play every play on defense as well. Had a chance to meet his father at a golf tournament a couple of weeks ago, and really good family. He's going to Navy, the Brady Carmichael, the quarterback. So they've got talent. The running back's going to James Madison, Trey Dudley. I don't even know if Briar's put it all together yet, and I think when they get a few more games under the belt, they're going to be tough to stop. Independence, a couple great players there. They're a little inconsistent, though, for me right now. But they have a freshman running back who I think he's going for about $130 a game right now. His name is, and I wrote it down because I wasn't familiar with him, Robert Kellen. He's 6'1", 210 as a freshman running back. Now, he'll probably grow out of that frame, and I'm sure running back won't be his long-term position because I suspect he's going to get a few more inches and a few more pounds. But they really do some things dynamically from an offensive standpoint as well. The question is going to be, can Stonebridge's defense carry them past teams like that? And right now, I think their defense will hold teams to a few points, but I think, Briarwoods can probably put 14, 21, 28 points on the board, and I'm not sure if Stonebridge can match that in a game. We'll see them in a couple of weeks, and I think we'll get a good taste of how good has Stonebridge improved enough to be able to hang with Briar. I just don't see it right now.
Jason, is the running back going to James Madison from Briarwoods? He's a little guy, right? So is he?
No, he's sort of tall. He's about 6'1". Trey Dudley. He's a taller guy. They've got a little utility back kid by the name of Tyler Yoder that they use a lot. You may have seen him if you saw that game. More of a receiver, but they'll put him in the sort of on some end rounds and things like that. But Trey Dudley's the kid you're thinking about that's going to Madison, and he's probably 6'1", 6'1.5". So he's sort of tall for a running back, but he's really good. Real strong kid, can actually carry some tackles through.
Yeah. Well, I also wanted to shout out 2 kids whose parents are prominent on social media. Gavin Beggs, his dad, Patrick Beggs, I've got to know a little bit. He's playing well in the secondary at Independence. And also Bobby Curran, his uncle, Matt is the lacrosse coach at Robinson, won all these state championships, and his dad, Nick, also played at Robinson as well. So those two kids have been playing real well in the Independence defense. Brian, do you have any thoughts on the Class 5 Potomac district
Yeah,
in Loudoun County?
Briar Woods, like Jason mentioned, is interested with Brady Carmichael. I knew Brady or knew of Brady about 4 or 5 years ago, playing 7-on-7 in eighth and ninth grade, and a couple of the coaches were kind of had their eye on him, saying, "Hey, this kid's going to be legit." His dad actually went to Potomac with me, so yeah, I mean, it looks like they're going to be off and running for sure heading into the playoffs. Well, when do they play Stonebridge? Is it typically the last game of the season, or?
No, Riverside and Stonebridge play on the last game of
Okay.
the season. I want to say it's the week before that, I think. So,
Yeah, the other thing too with Stonebridge, it's interesting with Mickey's single wing. It's national kind of attention with his single wing, and you mentioned the offensive struggles. That was what the question marks I had going into the season is kind of how they were going to adapt new offensive system, things like that. And it sounds like they're still kind of not there yet, is what you're saying, Jason.
yeah, they've probably had five different kids under center at a certain point this year
Mm,
from a quarterback position. They haven't quite been able to find that formula. Um, and it's a lot of normal power stuff. So, teams can stack the box if they really, aren't much of a passing threat. And that's what's shown. I mean, they are in some close games. Some of these games have been 0-0, heading
yeah.
into the third quarter. Their defense is really good. They've got guys, multiple offered guys at Power 4 schools on the defense. And that tends to hold up, for the most part. I just don't know if it'll be able to hold up, against a good offensive team like Briar or maybe even Indy here in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, so it's a very exciting conference. The schools that are very close to each other. Relatively all of them are new schools, so it's fun as that culture is building in that conference. Let's go to
Hey, Julie,
class
just a
four.
quick reminder
Sure.
for your viewers. There's only 9 teams in that district, and they've chose or that region rather. They've in the last couple of years, you may remember they only take 6. The top 2 teams get buys. So instead of letting eight out of the 9 teams in, which virtually almost everybody minus one, they only take 6, and the top 2 teams get buys. So you have to get to at least 6 in the power points in order to make the regional playoffs.
Wow, that's
Interesting.
still yet another challenge by having so many classifications and so hard to thread the needle and make districts that make sense and also be regionally based. Let's go to class 4 Loudoun County, and let's start with Dulles, the Dulles district. I think I had earlier I said that Independence had beaten I said someone had beaten Loudoun County 42-7. That was actually Tuscarora, Tuskegee that beat
Yeah.
Loudoun County 42-7. That was a huge result. I said it was Briar Woods. It was actually they did beat Loudoun County, but that was Tuscarora. Tuscarora is their record on paper is pretty impressive. They beat Loudoun Valley also easily, but they did lose to Indy early in the season. So this is a very interesting team, this Tuscarora, and they look like it seems like Tuscarora is good at everything, but they seem like they're posed to be a force in the postseason. So, Jason, you want to start off with Dallas?
Yeah, I think Tuskegee is likely still the best team over Valley, certainly over Rock Ridge and Heritage and Dominion in that district in Region 4C. They've got a couple guys that are going to ACC schools here. Dawson Pugh, I think, is going to Boston College. Tristan is it Teasdale? He's going to NC State, I believe.
Wow.
So they've got a lot of talent on their team. The loss did surprise me. And I didn't see that game, and you never know. Sometimes, if one or two of your star players are out, and I'm not saying they were in that game, that could sort of change the narrative of a high school football game real quickly, as you guys know. And sometimes it's hard to get that information about who played, who didn't play. I like Tuskegee. I think they've got enough experience. We've seen them the last few years, make some really, really deep runs in the playoffs. Jared Toller, the coach, I'm always impressed with what he puts out on the field every Friday night. So I do think Tuskegee in the Dulles district is the cream of the crop, and I think that'll show come postseason.
Yeah. Um, Brian, any thoughts on Dulles?
Yeah, I agree with Jason. I mean, Tuskegee for sure looks like it's going to be the team out of Dulles. They've been a traditional, powerhouse in that district. Jason, do they do 8 teams out of that region as well for playoffs?
Yeah, they do 8. Yeah, they
They
do
do
8
eight.
in that.
Okay, because I
They
was
do
looking
8
at the
in the Mountain
PowerPoints. They
State.
only
So
have 10 in the division, so eight of those
there's
10.
10, so only 2
Okay,
teams. So to the best of my knowledge, unless they changed it and I didn't see it in the offseason, Brian, I'm 99% sure 8 out of the 10 will make it in Region 4C.
gotcha.
I believe that's an all Loudoun region too. I think it's just those two districts, right? The
Correct.
Dulles and
Catoctin and
Cactus.
Dulles. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's go to the Cactocton. Hope I said that right. John Champ is one of the class teams in Northern Virginia this year. It seems, at least on paper, I haven't seen them. Um, Woodgrove has had some very interesting results. Loudoun County, who I've seen live, is impressive live, but they've had some big losses as well. Woodgrove has Connor Salmon, one of the most exciting prospects. He's a junior in the state. He's also a state champion in the 100-meter dash. You love to see that. But they've had their top 2 quarterbacks have been injured, which may have contributed to their 17-0 loss against Independence. Anyway, I guess the question is, can Loudoun County and Woodgrove challenge John Champ's supremacy? What do you think, Jason?
My quick answer is no. I think County and Woodgrove are good teams. I mean, you saw Woodgrove with that win over Stonebridge, but we know Stonebridge is, struggling this year, as we talked about. I like John Champ and what they're doing. They're undefeated right now. Their quarterback Brendan Pena, who came over from Stonebridge, ironically, he's had a really good year. They've got another kid that they can rotate in at quarterback, Dominic Plush. Sean Springs, if you guys remember him, who played for the Ohio State and, of course, the Redskin franchise.
Yeah.
His kid is on that team. It's really good defensive back. Sort of undersized a little bit, but obviously, athletically gifted, knows the game. I like John Champ. I think that we're going to look back at that week 1 game against Briar. I think it was an 8-7 game or 7-6 game, 1-point game between 2 really good teams in John Champ and Briar Woods. And I think, to me, that sort of set the tone that, okay, both of those teams are will be teams that challenge for their regional title. So I like Champ in this. I do like County and Woodgrove. I think they've got some pieces. I just don't think they have enough to challenge Champ in the Catoctin.
Jeremiah Davis's son plays linebacker for Loudoun
Yep.
County. It's very impressive visually. He was all over the field when I watched him play Riverside. How about you, Brian? Brian, any thoughts on?
He's a good player. He's a really good player. Julie.
He is. Yes, he is. Like his dad was as well. A Penn State player, I believe, right? Jason? Yeah.
Yes.
Well, it's interesting with John Champ because they were Region 6B just a few years ago, and
Yeah.
they were up and coming back then as well. I mean, if you recall the big shootout they had with Patriot, I think it was like 60 something or whatever. That offense was humming. I mean, they passed it a ton. With their new quarterback now, it sounds like they're continuing that. I think the key for them, at least back then, was making sure the defense stayed in check, and then just looking through the scores and kind of the results throughout the season. It looks like they've been able to hold serve pretty good on the defensive side of the ball.
They host Woodgrove this Friday, so keep your eye on that score, and that may give you a little indication.
Because they played Loudoun County last week, right? Is that the
Well, real quickly, let's look beyond Northern Virginia to the rest of the state. It looks like it's the usual suspects. Maury looks overpowering. Highland Springs they had some early season losses, but they seem to be very comfortable. Now they're at the meat of their schedule. The teams from inner city Richmond, one of the most interesting dynamics I've seen in high school football, the urban football teams are on the rise. 10, 20 years ago, the inner city was terrible in football. There might be one good school, but the best athletes are going to private schools, the strength was in the county. Now, everywhere I'm seeing Dunbar, Baltimore being a football power, Dunbar, DC, solid in football. The Richmond teams, the Norfolk teams, the inner city is back in football. It's an amazing dynamic. But let's talk about that. Have you guys noticed that how the city teams are back playing football again, not just basketball?
Julian, I think it's one of the most under talked about things in high school sports in the state here. It's great to see. I mean, typically, as you know, the resources, the financial backing, maybe the community support historically behind those teams has been lacking. So for them to be able to, sort of pull themselves up by the bootstraps and put good product on the field and get kids to in the classrooms to want to come out and play, I think it's a testament to rebuilding some of the brand of some of these inner city schools, and I think it's great to see. I think there's nothing more exciting to me than a school that's literally in a downtown area of a town performing well. I think it's great. I think the community can really get behind them when that happens. And historically, it had gone the other way. The trend was not good in favor of those inner city schools, and you're really seeing it, particularly those Richmond schools like Armstrong and TJ and some of those guys. I mean, it's they're on their way to potential state titles at some point. Maybe not this year, but if they can keep that up and keep their coaching staff intact, it's really phenomenal
Yeah,
to
they're
see.
both undefeated,
I'm a
right?
huge fan of it. Yeah.
I'm sorry, Brian.
I was going to say, I think they're both undefeated at the top of the
Yep.
region, whatever. I think it's region 3B is they're in, Armstrong and TJ.
Yes, Larry Merritt, Lee Merritt, who has a podcast, he was telling me that the city coaches are turning down jobs in the suburbs now. And it used to
Huh.
be you had a job in the city, you proved you can do a lot with a little, not little in terms of talent, but little in terms of resources. And those guys they're choosing to stay at Huguenot and Thomas Jefferson in the city schools instead of going to Manchester or whatever now, which is very interesting development. But in the rest of the state, I haven't really seen any really surprises or anything that of note of the rest of the state. It just seems like the teams that are always good are winning. But how about you guys? Are there any surprises throughout the state?
Uh, I think you've got in class 5, William Fleming out of Roanoke. I think could really make some noise potentially to challenge for the region that would play Region 5D. They're in 5C, I believe. Uh, I've been reading a little bit about. I haven't seen them play obviously this year, but they have a lot of pieces in place. So I wouldn't be surprised if maybe a Matoka and a William Fleming meet in that region. But I think the super top heaviness that we see a Hayfield in Class 6, a Maury in Class 5, a Phoebus in Class 4. And in Class 4 is probably a little deeper, so maybe there's some folks that could challenge Phoebus, but I wouldn't be surprised if we see a repeat of Maury and Phoebus for titles and Hayfield, sort of moving from Freedom to Hayfield to take that title in Class 6. I think just those three teams continually stick out week after week. When I go look at the scores or hear from you guys, hey, they scored so and so on somebody, I'm not surprised. I just think the talent and the coaching at those three schools right now is superior to pretty much everyone else in the state.
Yeah. Thanks, Jason. Hey, Ryan, how about you? Any thoughts about the rest of the state?
Yeah, I agree with Jason. I mean, you look at the top teams; they're the top teams year in and year out, and it's for a reason. I mean, they have great coaching. It's funny you see a lot of the chatter about classifications. Throw all that out the window when it comes to those teams. I mean, those top class 4 teams can go toe to toe with some of the class 6 teams. They're just great programs. So.
Yeah. Well, let's go to the college football update. And we got 10 more minutes here. Brian, let's start with UVA. UVA's had a solid start to the season, won some close games, one game from behind to win 2 games. As a UVA guy, it feels good that they so far have had a relatively drama-free season. They had the terrible tragedy, then they had all those transfers after the tragedy. I really feel like Tony Elliott is getting a chance, to play with a fully stacked deck. Maybe not as stacked as some of the teams he's playing, but anyway, a big unfortunate loss with some turnovers or some misplays this weekend. But what are your midseason thoughts on the UVA?
I'm pleasantly surprised. I did not expect to be 4-2 in week 6 here. I went to the game. What was it? Not this past weekend, but the weekend before. It was exciting. It felt like UVA football is coming back, and after a lot of struggles, I'm not just a UVA basketball fan anymore. It's turning it around. So hopefully they can keep it going. I mean, I think the key obviously is that last game of the season. So if we can squeak out one finally, that'll be a good season for sure. Package a bowl game with that.
Yeah, get a bowl game. Jason, I know you're not I know you might be conflicted to give a positive view on UVA since you're a JMU guy. But what are your thoughts so far on UVA?
I mean, tip of the cap to Tony Elliott at 4-2. Again, to you know, just a few years removed from from that terrible tragedy. I'm glad the administration is giving him time to rebuild this from that incident. The knee jerk reaction in college sports, as you guys know, if you lose 3 or 4 games in a row, you're on the hot seat. And you're just going to get run out of town. I'm glad the administration did not do that with Tony Elliott. And I think he's proven that he's earned a chance here for a couple more years to really build this program up, and it's great to see. So I think UVA is definitely on the right track, and I wish them nothing but the best. I mean, that's to overcome the obstacle that they have to overcome, and just emotionally and mentally to be able to get out there and do that. This is one of the better things I've seen in college football this year, frankly. So.
Yeah. Well, Jason, as you know, I'm on some of the parent boards for Facebook groups and board for James Madison, and because I have a daughter there, and it's I saw some light criticism of the team. They had a loss 2 weeks ago. Jason, remind me, they lost 2 weeks ago.
They lost to who was that lost to? Julian?
21-19. I can't think of it.
It was
Yeah.
Louisiana Monroe, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, a team that
Yep.
many of us had never heard of. And everything has gone well for James Madison in the last 2 years in football. Actually, almost every sport, soccer, basketball. They've just been on an incredible run. But the expectations are creeping up there now. Their coach went to Indiana, and I believe he's doing great.
Phenomenal.
Jason, what are your thoughts? Do you think James Madison is on the right track, given they lost a coach, and they had a lot of defections in the transfer portal in the offseason?
They did. I feel like half their team, at least probably some of the most talented players, ended up with Coach Signetti at Indiana. And you mentioned Indiana's undefeated. I think right now he's pulled them in. But Bob Chesney, the coach that came in from Holy Cross, again, I think he's done a phenomenal job to get these guys to this point with only one loss on the season. So he's had to put together a roster. Now, he did a really good job at Holy Cross. That was something that I was pretty impressive what he was building up there. So. I like what they're doing, Julian. One of the things they're trying to compete against, and I think they've done a good job. And both Signetti, formerly, and now Chesney, is putting their eyes and their scholarships around in-state Virginia players. And then you've got to be able to do that. And I think, for whatever reason, for a few years anyway, maybe former coaches, both UVA and Tech took their eye off the ball with that. And we've talked about it. I'm sure we all agree that. You got to start with folks in your backyard and get those kids to at least want to come to one of these schools. JMU jumped in over that and were able to steal a lot of really talented kids that I felt, could have or should have been playing in the ACC. JMU got them offers. They stayed in that program and they went there. Now I think you see, with both Pry and Elliott trying to do something to combat that. And they're really, really, really pushing hard to recruit in-state, which is great. So there's a lot of talent in the state of Virginia. Let's not fool ourselves here. We can sit here and say, hey, we see a lot of scores that are blowouts and things like this, but there's a lot of really good kids out there. And I'm glad to see the in-state schools, like even at JMU, are going after kids like that.
I think it's probably hard to get the kind of NIL money in Virginia to attract folks from the South to come up here because, the money down South is probably going to be higher. So I think it was funny when I was at UVA, and Brian may have caught a little bit of this, but it was always a knock against UVA in basketball and football that we did not recruit in-state. That we didn't do a good – Tech always did a better job in state. In football, North Carolina and Maryland used to come in here and take all the players from GW Danville and Northern Virginia. So it's that was an old hang up that a lot of our fans – or criticism that many of the fans would lodge against UVA. But you got to be able to protect your own turf. And in an NIL world, I do think we're going to have a better opportunity with people that have maybe ownership because they live in the state. Brian, do you have any thoughts on JMU?
Yeah, I got ties just like you, Julian. My oldest graduated from JMU, so it's been a little rough the last couple of years with JMU beating UVA and that family trash talk. But yeah, I'm a big fan of JMU and what they've been doing. I'm actually pleasantly surprised. I thought when the former coach took off to Indiana and all those transfers, it was going to be a rough, start to the season. But they didn't skip a beat, so it's definitely on a run for sure.
Yeah, well, it's exciting. Well, look, I hate to do this, but we're going to have to talk about Virginia Tech. because Tech was again down like the last couple of years, but this year they've had some exciting results. A very unfortunate loss, I believe, to Florida State on a was it Florida State?
Miami,
Oh,
Miami.
jeez.
Yeah. But anyway, what are you guys' thoughts on Tech? Brian, you want to go first? You haven't? Do
Yeah, I mean,
you?
they've had a bunch of one-score losses. I saw some stat like they ranked all the teams if those one-score losses would have flipped, and it would have been Virginia Tech as the number one team in the country or something like that.
Oh
But
wow,
yeah, I mean, I think if they can kind of continue to kind of turn that program around, it's good for the state. I mean, it's bad for Virginia, the state of Virginia football when UVA and Virginia Tech, have had rough years. I mean, you got Liberty and JMU up and coming. If Virginia and Virginia Tech can kind of turn that around, that's great for the state and keep all those players in the state for sure.
it is. It is. It's fun to have a kind of an intramural competition
Yeah.
in the state of Virginia of tough teams, especially now that James Madison has entered that conversation. Jason, what do you think about Tech?
Yeah, look, I was super, super high on them early in the season, as a lot of people were. They had a lot of returning starters. I think like 20 or 21 returning starters, between the two sides of the ball. But again, their losses have been very close losses, like Brian mentioned. So I think the progression in college football, sometimes you have to have close losses, learn from them, right? Go back 2 years, those losses weren't, 1, 3, and 7 point losses. They were 13, 20, and 30 point losses. So I think the next evolution, hopefully for Brent Pry and his staff, is to get these guys, where the 1 point losses are turning into 1 point wins and then a 10 point win. I know it's not always that easy with NIL transfer, the portal, and all this, but I think they are on both UVA and Tech, and in my honest opinion, are on very good paths right now. So hopefully there's no major disruptors. I know offseason in college football can just be completely chaotic, so we'll have to see. But I do like what Pry's doing as well, and I think both of those teams, are slotted for bowl games, and that would be great to see. So, and I'm very curious when they play each other at the end of the season to see what the result of this is. Because right now, to me, it's a coin flip. I think they're both about even on the field. So,
You can throw the records out in that game.
yeah, man.
Yeah, well, let's end with the Commanders. Now, the Commanders had a statement loss against the Ravens. The Ravens probably are the hottest team in the NFL after two early season losses. And Washington went up to Baltimore. The Ravens were in control of the game in the second half, but the Commanders were never out of reach. A young quarterback continues to impress. You get the feeling this Commanders team may be legit. Jason, what are your thoughts about the Commanders?
Yeah, I do think they're legit, Julian. I absolutely think they're legit. I mean, typically you don't see rookie quarterbacks come in and perform like this. We saw it last year with C.J. Stroud out of Houston. Had a very, very good year, but historically, rookie quarterbacks typically struggle. And that's been everything but what Jaden Daniels has done. So very, very impressive. Defensively, there's probably some holes in that team still. And I know they lost a couple of guys here against the Commanders or against the Ravens that, may not be back for the season. I think John Allen, one of their interior linemen, former Stonebridge guy,
Oh, so much.
he's out for the season now with a torn pec. So, but I like what they're doing. Look, I don't want to get too much commentary on ownership, but as soon as this ownership changed hands, guys want to stay in the building longer. People want to go work for them. There's just a lot of energy and effort around what's going on when you change things at the very top, and it's evident. And whether that's leading to wins on the field, I don't know. But for them to be 4-2 at this point, I think every Commander fan that's out there would absolutely sign up for that, and twice on Sundays. So
I hope pointing out good karma is not bad karma, because I see that as soon as Daniel Snyder left, it seems like things immediately started to move upwards. How about you, Brian? What are your early thoughts?
It's amazing. About this time, mid-October, I've tuned out NFL as a long-suffering Redskins and Commanders fan, and this year, it's must-see TV for me. Jay Daniels is amazing. I think what Jason said on the defensive side of the ball, that's the little shaky part. A little too much. Too much holes there, especially in the secondary. But if they can continue to kind of keep that, Coach Quinn's a defensive guy, so hopefully they can continue to get that on track. But yeah, it's exciting. Finally, it feels like the grown-ups are in charge. If you want to use that cliche for sure.
Yeah, I think the fans are coming back. I think the Ravens were starting to encroach on some of the
Mhm.
Commanders fans, and I think hopefully Commanders fans will come home. I was never a Redskin fan growing up. I was a Steeler fan, but I've learned over years in business and stuff, the whole city operates
Yeah.
in a better mood if the Washington football team is on top. So I've learned to become a Commanders fan, and I'm definitely on board now. Look, guys, this has been great. We covered a lot of ground. I appreciate you guys taking time out of your busy day. Let's get back together after Thanksgiving or even before Thanksgiving and talk about the playoffs and we can see how the PowerPoint shake out and some of the great matches. But thanks for doing this, guys. I look forward to doing this down the road.
Yeah, sounds like a plan, Julian.
Yeah,
Thanks,
appreciate it,
Brian.
Julian.
Yeah, enjoy it, guys. Take care. Have a good
Thanks,
day.
guys.